Good afternoon, everyone. This is a continuation of day one of the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference, and let's move right into our next session. You're at session 2.2. As of right is all right. Demystifying zoning to build more homes. And I just want to thank our sponsors again for their generosity to make this conference happen. And I'm going to turn it over to our main presenters from Desegregate Connecticut. Uh, we'll start with Nick Cantor, who is the program director for Desegregate Connecticut, and I'll stop sharing.
Hey everyone. Let's see if this share works. Did I do it? I think I did it. Yay. So thanks, Sean, for that intro, and we're really excited to be here today to talk about As of Right is All Right, demystifying an important zoning tool. Um, to get going, quick agenda here, we're going to talk about just basically laying the land of what As of Right means. So then talk about some examples in Connecticut, and then go into some strategies for implementation and advocacy, and have time at the end for questions for folks. If you have questions, feel free to also throw it in the chat. We'll try to take them as we can, but we'll definitely have time at the end. Quick introductions. I'm Nick Cantor, like Sean said, Program Director for Desegregate Connecticut. I'm joined also with Phoebe Allen, our Policy Director, Bridget Tao, our Research Intern, and Pete Harrison is here as well, who's the Connecticut Director at the Regional Plan Association. He may hop on from time to time. Who we are, Desegregate Connecticut, we're pro-homes coalitions of neighbors and nonprofits. We believe that better land use laws will make Connecticut more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable. We're a program of the RPA. And we believe in an all of the above approach: build more kinds of homes, act at every level of government, and connect all related issues. And we're excited to talk about As of Right today because it comes up a lot in a lot of our trainings that we do, in talking to legislators and talking to people on the ground. And it really comes at the core of, we think, one of the key reasons, or one of the key factors of, why does it take so long and cost so much to build the types of homes our community wants and needs. And to talk about this quickly, or to start here, is really just to step back for a second and to talk about our current zoning system and how it works today. Right now, most multifamily projects must go through discretionary project-by-project approval processes. That means multiple hearings, redesigns, legal fees, long delays. The soft cost of this alone could be 20 to 30% more on every project, and those costs get passed through to people who eventually rent or buy the homes. So the current system that we have is slow and expensive, and it creates adversarial dynamics that really serves no one. The unpredictability pushes out small and nonprofit builders as well, who can't absorb that risk of, project being denied, having to be redesigned 5, 6 times. Everyone on this call has probably heard of those sort of projects around their towns or other communities. And as a result of what we get is fewer homes being built. Um, and in order to sort of move the needle here, we think as of right zoning, or moving away from an arbitrary zoning process to a predictable planning process, is really important. And that's why we're here saying as of right is all right. I know it's a little punny, but we'll go with it for now. So what is as of right? And what does that mean when we're saying that? As of right's often called by right, refers to development that complies with existing local zoning and can therefore be approved without special permits, variances, or discretionary review. I'm also a zoning commissioner in Norwalk, and I can tell you sometimes projects not coming to the zoning commission is a welcome breath of fresh air. And what this means is, if proposals meet regulations that the community established, you're entitled to the permit. Commissions still can review for compliance through site plans, form-based codes, and other rules up front. But really, what this does is the town decides what it wants, where it wants it, and puts that planning vision forward, which we think is really important and really takes away a lot of the ambiguity that can exist. Common misperceptions with as of right zoning. First, it's not a free-for-all. All zoning regulations still apply. You can still have whatever setbacks, requirements you have there, still need to comply with your zoning regulations, period. People hear as of right and they think it's a free for all. That's not. As of right just defines the requirements up front clearly, so there's less ambiguity for both the community and the developers who are going into it. I like to describe it as, tell me what you want to build, where you want it to build, and let the developer build it. That's really what it's aiming to do. Not surrendering local control, because communities set those rules up front. The public still has input on what your zoning regulations are and where those zones can be and how do you want to make that all happen. It's just not arbitrary based on, the commission at that point in time. It's not a developer giveaway, rather it levels the playing field and making it more predictable and ideally cheaper to build, and then cheaper for the home renter or home buyer after the fact. And then really this is not 830G. Nothing is bypassed. Compliance is required. Oops, sorry. And this graphic I think is nice that Phoebe put together for us today is 830G. You think about it, you hear that, and I think people often confuse 830G with as of right, and they're very separate. 830G is an appeal process that enables local override as possible. As of right, you cannot bypass local regs. What you're doing is putting the zoning up front. And I also like to note this, both subject to building and fire codes, because people sometimes get worried that, oh my God, you can build absolutely anything you want. And that's also not true. Why as of right is more democratic? I sort of mentioned a couple of these, but first off, it moves the planning to the upfront, not a case-by-case basis. Oh, sorry. Engages the whole community, just not those who attend hearings on those one-off times, right? If you have those planning processes, planning meetings, and people know, hey, we're going to set the vision for our town and community, you get pretty good turnout to that. Versus, do you have to rely on people coming out to one-by-one projects? Establishes consistent rules that apply equally to all applicants, reduces the ad hoc decision-making, and shifts power, again, from a discretionary process to a more transparent process. And more so than not, really supports long-term community goals, versus it being one-off negotiations with developers or projects. And yeah, so basically here we have, predictability, lower cost, more homes aligns with the communities. Why we think as of right in certain places makes more sense. It's not a silver bullet, nothing is, but we think especially in the missing middle ADU arena, as of right has a lot of value to be had. And other places are doing it. We're not alone. As of right in other New England states, Maine allows for 3 homes per lot. 4 homes if it's a designated growth area. Massachusetts have ADUs as of right. New Hampshire's allows for detached ADUs. They had attached ADUs since I think 2017, and it was fairly successful. So they moved to allowing for detached. They also have multifamily in commercial zones, the commercial conversions, and then Vermont ADUs by right statewide and allow for duplexes in single family districts and 4 homes where there's water and sewer. Really seeing a broad spectrum of states, some red, some blue, some purple, saying as of right makes sense in our community. And with that, I think we were going to double click a little bit into some examples in Connecticut about as of right. So I'll turn it over to Bridget.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So we can head on over to the next slide. All right, so as of right currently is exercised pretty broadly throughout the state, as 91% of our land is zoned as of right for single family housing. This is in very stark contrast, however, to the 2% of land throughout the state that is zoned as of right for multifamily housing. And while that makes the process of obtaining a permit for single family housing a little easier, that doesn't necessarily mean you can just build whatever you'd like for a single family home. Builders still have to adhere to regulations set by municipalities in regards to setbacks, height, lot size, etc. However, this trend broadly is detrimental to towns and cities as they grow and struggle to house families. Right, so I want to take a look at this home in Greenwich, Connecticut, which highlights this very, very worrying trend. So as you guys can see, this home is 7,000 square foot, but it is a single family home only. And this home, in essence, represents a mismatch between the homes that are allowed as of right more easily and the actual demand for housing. When these types of homes are constructed, they're done so with very little resistance from local authorities, and throughout 91% of the state, lots can be transformed into single-family homes without much protest. However, it's very difficult to imagine a project with 4 stories, housing multiple families, being constructed this easily. And this is one of the very, very visible downsides to the proliferation of single family as of right. All right.
And then
However, we're going to go.
one thing to note here too is we're not saying we have the expertise of every particular example we're going to go through, just more using these as generalizations and considerations as we're talking about as of right. So I'm sure we probably have a detail with some of these examples wrong, but really what we're going more for is the essence here of what we mean by as of right and what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good note, Nick. That kind of transitions us into Norwalk as a case where we can see as of right zoning that's done right. So in Norwalk, there were a lot of zoning changes that were implemented in 2024, and that sort of allowed certain lots to be upzoned, where the density was increased for housing. We can go to the next slide to get a closer look. So there's this lot on the left that was previously single family, but then thanks to the new ordinance changes, it became a site where developers built 9 homes for families. And this is especially helpful because of the economic hub that is Norwalk. And it addresses, those family needs where the jobs are in Norwalk, but the housing might not be as accessible. Yeah, so to the right over there on the map, you can see a hospital that employs many, many people, as well as, some other places that are also opportunities of employment. All right, and then my last sort of example that I'm going to walk us through is how the current process for zoning really leaves open a lot of opportunities for complications and delays in housing to be built. So there is this plot of land in New Canaan that was just recently sort of settled in the courts, where a developer had previously wanted to basically turn this previously single family home into a development with lots of apartments, some of them affordable. However, because New Canaan denied him a permit, he had to then appeal via 830G. And this has been a process that's taken about 3 years, and it's delayed the actual construction of the home and the opportunity for people to have housing.
And it makes it more adversarial. I think a lot of folks would agree that the 830G process can be very adversarial and not necessarily smooth running. So there are alternatives to that sort of model, and we think a better framework using as of right can actually get us there faster.
Right. Yeah. So just to summarize, currently the market demand for housing, particularly near transit and other hubs, is mismatching with outdated single-family zoning throughout the state. Now, the result is complications like 830G lawsuits where, adversarial dynamics are really being pushed forward, and not even developers are benefiting from this quote unquote loophole. Developers and towns with as of right zoning would have more a democratic standing and understanding. And this would ultimately, help with efficiency in building up housing. And if, planning and zoning commissions wanted more density as of right, they are able to retain control of the development and ensure where they want to build is actually being followed.
Thanks, Bridget. Now, Phoebe's going to take over, talk about some strategies here.
Great. Thanks, Nick. We're going to start by just quickly walking through the new tools created through our wins in HB 802 that we're excited about. The bill requires towns to create housing growth plans to allow more homes as of right. And if a town takes certain steps to allow more homes as of right, including near transit stations or in downtowns, it becomes eligible for new funding through the housing growth program. We're particularly excited about the passage of Work, Live, Ride, which Desegregate Connecticut has been fighting for a few years now. Towns and cities can access this housing growth program funding by creating transit-oriented communities, which allow several types of housing as of right near transit, and also allows as of right conversions of commercial or residential buildings into these types of homes. Towns can also no longer require off-street parking for new apartment buildings with fewer than 16 homes, with a few exceptions. And we also want to highlight commercial to residential conversions, creating 2 to 9 homes that are now allowed under summary review rather than full hearings. That brings us to a topic of discussion since HB 8002 was introduced. What exactly is the difference between as of right and summary review? We're still working this out ourselves, but we know for certain that the bill allows the following as of right. Small multifamily developments in transit-oriented communities designated under Work, Live, Ride, ADUs, which we'll discuss shortly, and additional as of right opportunities through each town's housing growth program. Summary review is a new term introduced in HB 8002. Supporters of the term say it is definitionally identical to as of right, but there are still a few open questions, particularly around when and how that review happens. So our current understanding is as follows. As of right means a purely administrative approval, as long as the proposal meets the zoning criteria, no public hearing, no discretionary decision, and summary review could operate in 2 ways: as a simple over-the-counter administrative check, or as part of a public meeting, similar to a site plan review. So we'll be monitoring the implementation of the bill to see how it shakes out. Moving on to some of our strategies that we'll discuss today, we'll start with the smallest, gentlest way to add homes. That's ADUs. ADUs are really gaining popularity in varied states across the country because of their flexibility and their small size. In Connecticut in particular, ADUs were already intended to be allowed as of right a few years ago under PA 2129, but many towns chose to opt out. HB 8002 will now make ADUs allowed as of right within those transit-oriented districts with certain limitations. And that moves us into this more targeted strategy for adopting as of right, which is multifamily as of right districts, especially near transit or commercial corridors. These districts let towns say, here's where multifamily makes sense. Here are the standards, build according to them, and you can get a permit. That approach is predictable, it's transparent, it's rooted in real planning. And I think a perfect example of this as of right district would, of course, be the transit-oriented district through Work, Live, Ride. Just really makes sense to target a town's density around transit and create walkable mixed-use neighborhoods that are good for the economy, good for the environment, and good for the people who live in them. Taking it a step further, communities can allow as of right multifamily homes in multiple areas. That makes sense across their town or city, depending on local conditions. Nick, you can hop to the next slide. Missing middle homes like duplexes, triples, quads were once really a defining part of New England communities. They are, in fact, part of Connecticut's DNA, and we see them everywhere in our beloved historic neighborhoods, like in this postcard from over 100 years ago. They were not radical housing types. They were the norm. It was really post-World War II zoning, not community preference, that made them nearly impossible to build again. And as of right reforms can bring back these types of homes, the kinds of homes that are naturally more affordable and fit into our neighborhoods. So we see missing middle housing as a return to tradition rather than a departure from it. Form-based codes are another tool to pair with as of right. They let communities decide upfront what they want buildings to look and feel like, things like height, setbacks, massing, street character, and then allow as of right approvals for projects that fit that form. For many towns, this can be the right blend of design control and predictability. By setting the form and scale in advance, approvals are then automatic when a proposal meets those standards, which can protect neighborhood character and make it easier to deliver more homes. As of right development, we can go to the next slide, Nick. Thank you. As of right development really works best when it's paired with clear modern standards. Where a municipality wants to do as of right zoning, it's really important to consider dimensional standards that can make developments physically and financially feasible. So regulations like minimum lot size, floor area ratio, setback requirements, and height limits are all things that can really influence a project's success. Municipalities could also consider streamlining the site plan review and inspection process so that projects that meet minimum necessary standards can keep going and help get projects built on time. And then, of course, parking matters immensely. Minimum parking requirements use up not just valuable land, but also push up development costs, which is why we're so excited about the changes to parking requirements in HB 8002. So moving on to advocating effectively, where we'll end. We know that successful reform does not happen overnight and it doesn't happen alone. So we have a few sort of points to touch on here. The first is that it's essential to frame as of right as planning that not only respects local control, but in fact improves it. It creates a planning process where the community sets those rules ahead of time via democratic process so that permitting can happen within that chosen framework. And that reduces conflict and uncertainty. We also need to keep building the broad coalition that we're growing here with housing nonprofits, planners, small builders, business groups, young professionals, aging in place advocates, and faith groups. And really the best argument for as of right development is a complete one that takes economic equity and environmental arguments together and highlights the tangible benefits. And then the last point is that now with new resources coming from HB 8002, we need to take advantage of the significant state funding and technical assistance we'll have available to us from the Housing Growth Program. And that's it. Thanks so much for listening. We hope the presentation has provided some clear language and tools for everyone to advocate for as of right planning in your own communities, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. All right, the first is, has any town just added the specs of 830G to its own code? I've been thinking about that here in Weston. We could just do a text amendment for the entire town. I'm from Weston, by the way. That's where I grew up. We could just do a text amendment for the entire town saying that multifamily housing is allowable in the R2 zone as long as it is 30% affordable. And we would say that it's subject to the same setbacks and other dimensional standards. That's a good question. Has any town just added the specs of 830G to its own code? That's not
I don't know of
I
any.
personally know. Yeah, that's not something I personally know the answer to. I'm reading the rest
I'll
of it.
just jump in because we've never seen that. Although I will say Work Live Ride, as you may know, intentionally tried to incorporate the downside from people's perspectives of 830G to say if you opt into Work Live Ride and a development is 30% deed restricted over 10 units, that would be as of right within the district. So we did try to say let's split the difference, and some towns often say we want affordable housing, we don't want 830G, we just want to show where tell where it goes. So we thought, okay, well, presumably if you have that opportunity to do so, Work Live Ride is a way to do that. Obviously concentrating it near transit makes sense. So we're pretty confident that the component of Work Live Ride, the as of right component we talked about today, can take away some of that adversarial aspects of it by saying, okay, if you want a larger condo or rental development and you put aside 30% of it, that should be as of right. And the thinking is developers are not going to want to sit there and sue and go through all the rigmarole, that they'll say, okay, we can get our permit if we do exactly what this community wants, exactly where we want it. And we think we should, go forward on that. We think everybody wins in that scenario. So although it's unlikely anybody's done that now as on their own fruition, we believe that's going to happen with Work Live Ride.
Can I add to that question? The 8002 included funding to the regional councils of government for some for staffing to help with local plans. My question is around not so much the plans, but the zoning that Gus's question sort of suggested that that's very technical, and a lot of communities don't have access to a lot of planners. Do you see like how do you see that as a barrier or opportunity for communities to try to revisit what as of right means in their towns?
Well, Sean, if that was a question for me, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
One thing I'll tell you, because I've been pursuing this sort of stuff over the last year and I understand that there's kind of a new avenue of state grants that are opening up here. For those of us, so for people who don't know, Weston is a town without a town. We don't have any transit. We're one of the few towns in Fairfield County that doesn't have a train station. We don't have a bus stop or anything like that. We have downtown. It's called Wilton, and we have a second downtown. It's called Westport. We don't actually have a downtown. So, for example, my hypothetical, it was a real question that I had, whether any town in Connecticut had essentially adopted 830G into its own code. If we did that in Weston, it wouldn't make any difference. No one's ever tried to build an 830G project here because we don't have water or sewer. So that's always another question I have, if anyone has ever succeeded in building an 830G development in a place without water or sewer. And I don't think that has happened anywhere in Connecticut. So anyway, I was just speculating as like maybe that would help normalize it, of like, because that's one thing I'm always trying consciously to do among some of the smaller towns and elected P&Z people is be like, hey, it's not so terrible, just so anyway. But Sean, to your point about like other resources, no, I mean, we don't have, I'm the one that tries to rewrite the code here, and believe me, it turns out to be like a lot harder than I thought without any real technical assistance. Like Westcog doesn't really give us any, and we don't have a budget for it. And for towns like us that don't have transit, I don't think any of the new funding is for us. And that's okay. Like other places like the other towns that have transit are the ones that need it. I think towns like us are kind of hoping that the next big bill that maybe we work on in the next couple years, that some of the small towns, and there are some of us within them that are pro development and pro housing, if we could get involved earlier and try to help craft some legislation that is more specifically focused on us. I get that there's bigger fish to fry, that we don't need it, but what we would need would be some kind of state incentive that actually, for example, paid for water and sewer in our downtown, even though we don't have transit. We're never going to win the grant sweepstakes for that kind of funding, I don't think, even if we completely dezoned our non-existent central business district. We created a village district for anyone. Was it 5 years ago? We rezoned the center of town for a village district, allowing multifamily housing, allowing mixed use. 5 years later, not a single thing has happened. It's just the economics are very hard away from water and sewer. Sorry, I'll stop. I don't know, Sean, if that helped you.
I'll just add, Gus. I mean, as 8002 is written, every town has to do a housing growth plan, and that if you do that, you are eligible for it, that housing growth fund. So everybody, even small rural towns that are transit adjacent, could be. I agree that it will likely be our recommendation, to the extent anyone will care about our recommendation, that there should be prioritization for towns that do work with RIDE, that do CMDA, and crossover there. So is it likely that there will be carve outs for transit adjacent or smaller towns? Maybe. Would there more likely, I think the product of the statewide water study that we've got working, it's kind of the big first task of this new stood up council. It's really to identify with some rational economic basis of, between town A that like Weston, hey, they're doing a really ambitious zoning. They would like to do that, but they need water funding. What would that look like cost wise? What's the actual ROI? We're at least hoping to introduce a little bit more rational economic analysis of things like that, because the state doesn't have that right now. It is kind of
Right,
ad hoc about where discretionary funding goes. That
right.
I can't promise that 8002 is going to solve for
No,
that totally, but
and look, Pete, there's no reason, like if we put water and sewer downtown and we rezone for everything, 10 years from now, we might have 100 units. Like it's just not, it's not a meaningful number relative to one project in Fairfield next to, it's not, it's, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, but we also recognize that, like, realistically, there's we're not the low hanging fruit. So, but we'd love to help be part of a model that could help, the smaller towns, the well and septic places. What our kind of goal is to figure out a way that we could be adding to our housing stock by like 0.5% a year, as opposed to 0% a year, which is what we've been doing for 20 years.
yeah, and look, and I know you guys are not this. Some towns will say we're not dense, we don't have water and sewer. That's not like as of right zoning can be applied in Weston for as of right ADUs, as of right.
No, and we have
septic.
Yeah,
those kinds of smaller missing middle developments can manage a community septic. So there are absolutely strategies. Maybe you're right, it won't get.
No, and Pete, look, and I don't want to dominate yes, we are
Yeah.
separately working on, we want to allow for cottage clusters. So on a 2-acre lot, instead of just having one house, that right now you're allowed to have a home and a single ADU capped at 850 square feet. I think we're talking about allowing like 3 ADUs or something. Like, we're kind of searching around for creative ideas, but as I always say, we're kind of working alone in the wilderness on this, and and there isn't, maybe in the new law we will get sort of more technical support, but we'd like to do these kinds of things, but I don't, it's not easy. Like, yes, if we waived it, if we just repealed 2-acre zoning, all we would get is a gradual more McMansions, which is, it is housing production, but if the state law said that 2-acre zoning is now 1-acre zoning, across the entire state, then, to the extent that there is a vacant 2-acre lot in Weston, of which there are only like 5, the spec builder who was going to put one 4,500 or 5,500 square foot house on 2 acres would now put 2 each on 1 acre. And so that would double our housing production from 4 homes a year to 8, and it might improve tear down math, but it would just take forever. So we're trying to come up with other things. But anyway, I don't want to make it all about me.
You can follow.
Thank you guys. I appreciate that. I'm gonna take Larry's question from the chat and also pose it to the group that we have here. We now require 12% affordable housing for multifamily units over 5 units, but wonder if that's too high. What's the experience around Connecticut?
Yeah, good question, Larry. And I'm sure, we have, from the Desegregate Connecticut standpoint, the research that we've done and groups that we've talked to across the country, there's a pretty growing debate about the idea of unfunded versus funded inclusionary zoning. Sort of right now in Connecticut, we have unfunded inclusionary zoning. So that example, okay, so that 6th unit would need to be deed restricted. That would need to be subsidized somehow. They're going to be subsidized in those other 5 units, the final pricing. So that's the developer paying that, but the end renter or homeowner in that scenario paying for it. It's discussion of how can you fund those or put bonus funding in for a public subsidy to not make it that the renter or the homeowner pay for that. Work, live, ride. The language changed in the final bill. Part of that's because CHAFA is changing their process. But the short answer is there is not a one size fits all inclusionary zoning set aside. That in places like Lower Fairfield County at a certain density, that 30% threshold can work because of the market rents. But in lots of other places, that can't really work. And there's a lot of different discussions. I think developers could be more transparent about their pro formers and otherwise. But 12% has been floated in a lot of places, particularly for smaller developments. There have been some towns, I think incorrectly have put in 15 or 20% inclusionary zonings with probably a very good faith this is a way to build affordable housing. It's probably having the opposite effect. Certainly there's enough empirical research that district-wide inclusionary zoning, broad strokes, are actually deterring development. So certainly, at least for work live ride perspective, we try to have a lot more nuance. That percentage could vary depending on the type of market and location and scale. CMDA does not have any inclusionary zoning set aside. It's more about market rate production. We wanted to have some kind of balance, but I think and we'll say for most places that we have had conversations with the planning and zoning commissions that have done that, there is a good faith attempt. We do want to see some affordable housing development, but it can be counterproductive that you're assuming developers are wealthier and more well personally financed than they are, and they can cover that cost. But in reality, it's pretty thin margins, and some of that's based on financing and other projections. So you're just making the development for the person buying it or renting it downstream more expensive.
Because our experience, in 3 years, we've only had one project proposed, and it was approved. 162 units, 12% affordable housing. It's close to a bus line.
And Larry, you have what town are you, Larry?
Guilford.
And you have water and sewers in that place, right?
No.
No.
No. All
No.
septic. All septic. This project along Route 1, there is water.
Okay, that's key.
A lot of places in town, there's not water.
Okay.
And we made this 12% town-wide instead of restricting it. So we've had something like 3 developers come in and were kind of raised their eyebrows at our 12% requirement, and maybe to go next door because they don't have such a requirement. Maybe 8002 makes this broader, so a developer won't go to the town next door because the town next door has the same needs the same kind of housing plan. So we're starting to question that 12%. To my mind, we should
Is
do
multifamily, like, was that development you said that actually went forward, was that as of right, or was that still a special permit variance?
It was special permit. There were lots of wetlands involved. There was a lot of excavation work involved. There was a little shopping center involved. So that it was a huge project with many things that had to be worked out. So that was special permit. To my mind, the zoning regulation change I'd like to see is the 9-unit or less as of right, and have that in town. Because we have room for infill housing near the transportation, rather than requiring a percentage of affordable for things that small.
I think Larry, I want to highlight, I think Larry has a really good point. You know, we set, and these numbers, these 10, 12, 15, 20, I think a lot of people pulled these out of a hat. We have our village district zoning I was mentioning before, 5 years ago, we pulled out of a hat that it should be 20% affordable. That's not based on anything. And in 5 years, we've had 0 projects. So we're actually thinking about not just cutting it, but zeroing it out. And we're waiting to see how this, 8002, how the new housing plans on a regional basis kind of shake out what the expectations are. We have an affordable housing plan from 5 years ago. It says we're going to get affordable housing in our village district where we mandate 20%. If we zero that out, some could say that we're no longer arguing, that we're no longer acting in good faith on producing an affordable housing plan, because we would be producing an affordable housing plan that says that we expect 0 deed restricted affordable housing units in Weston. But the actual reality is that we have 0 deed restricted affordable units in Weston, and we have no prospect of ever having a single one without actual subsidy dollars going into it, because the development money just isn't there. So that's another thing we're looking for, is like, if other towns went down lower, we might actually get more housing if we took that to 0 or maybe to 10. We don't know.
I think, one of the aspects for as of right, which we talked about and Nick talked about in his part of the presentation, it is a predictability. Now, Larry, like, I'm vaguely familiar with that larger development. That was very complicated. There's certainly an argument that that's not something that's necessarily best fit for as of right development. But in certain cases where it is as of right, in the places the planning and zoning commissions and then wetland commissions have collaborated to say, even if it's a complicated place, here's kind of what we want to see in that complicated place, but it's as of right. That is a cost savers. So if you signal to the market to say, if you do X, Y, and Z, even a large, complicated mixed use development or a smaller one, if you do that, you get your permit, that's going to save, arguably 20, 30% of a project. Because right now in Connecticut, a lot of it is developed. The development costs are because it's discretionary permitting. So you're hiring the lawyer, you're hiring the architects, you're anticipating amendments to the proposal and all these different pieces, and that adds up. So if you remove that chunk of equation, say to a developer now, they can look at the regulations and say, okay, I can do X, Y, Z. You might unlock more opportunity for a subsidized development because of that. You can't guarantee that. I think Gus and Larry both bring up certainly examples we're hearing elsewhere as well. But demonstrably, where there are opportunities to do as of right, that will lead to lower costs for the developer, which will lead to lower costs for the renter or the homeowner. And that's obviously what we're looking for.
Wait, can I just ask one simple question, Pete? Would we be judged as bad people by the affordable housing community if we zeroed out the affordable housing set aside in our village district, but with a conscious statement of because we actually want something to get built?
I think people like you, Gus. You might talk too much, but I think people like you. But I can't speak for everybody in the affordable housing community. I think there is a completely good faith conversation, and that came up obviously in even the conversations at the high level for the bill about are we trying to get capital A deed restricted affordable housing, or are we just trying to get more housing in broad strokes that will reduce overall pricing? I don't think there's one answer to that. And I do think, there are going to be towns that it's going to be better to just try to get that kind of missing middle market rate housing. And you start doing that at scale across the state, those prices will come down. But I have no doubt, I'm sure Weston does need deed restricted affordable housing. There may just be different strategies or tools, be it a community land trust, vouchers, other ways a town can find those solutions than like an inclusionary zoning. That's what I would say. I don't know, Sean, you were joking too. If you've been in the belly beast in some parts of Fairfield.
Yes, and Gus is not a bad guy. I don't judge him that way. I was just going to say, Pete, what you're saying, there are a lot of other ways to skin the cat, and the housing authorities are another. Obviously, that is in 8002, another $50 million targeting smaller housing authorities. I don't know that Weston has one, Gus. Sorry.
To be clear, Weston has 0 units of affordable housing.
Okay, so you do not have a housing.
No. I say 0, it's not actually true. Apparently we have 2 that we don't even know where they are, because there is one house in our town that looks the same as every other house. It's a regular Connecticut suburban house, but apparently it has retired nuns living in it, and it is somehow like qualifies. But we have 0. We don't have a single apartment building in our town. And I recognize that we're not the standard town, so regs shouldn't be made for us, which is why I should let people talk about other things. But these are real issues, like and real, I do believe that the set asides, that the higher levels, whether it's 30, whether it's 20, whether it's even 12, that it reduces housing overall, and that there is a category difference between places that have sewers or even just the water lines, because a water line does, depending on your topography, a water line allows you to put several dozen units on a single acre, and that is usually the set. Anywhere where you have a water line, you can build more on septic than you could without the water line.
Yeah, and I'll just say this goes back to ADUs, what Phoebe had talked about with Public Act 21, and to some degree 8002 is at least moving in the right direction, is the more you standardize what can be built in Connecticut, and we really think particularly obviously like greater density around transit, but more likely just missing middle housing, is you're going to get lower costs. The more ADUs getting built that are, standardized are going to lower the costs because more developers are going to come into the market. They're going to be more standardized versions that'll come down for everybody. So that's, everyone says, or at least opponents say, we don't want statewide zoning, and every 169 towns are unique snowflakes. But the reality is, if you standardize more things and make things more predictable, the development community, whether it's public, private, for-profit, or nonprofit, will do a better job. We got wiped out after the Great Recession. A lot of small developers are just gone. And there are other factors in development, as we all know, but the more predictability we all put in at the local level and across the state, there will be a better muscle memory for development across the spectrum, and frankly, more resources for vouchers and for homelessness, because a better state economy does better for those sources. So, it's not just one intervention. We're not saying as of right is a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination, but the more predictability you put into this process, which right now is incredibly ad hoc, adversarial, discretionary, imprecise, non-empirical, whatever you want to say, the more rational expertise you put into this and predictability, the better outcomes are going to be. And 8002 still really puts that at the local level. Hiram had a conversation, text or a chat message about the POCDs and affordable housing plans. These are still fundamentally driven by the local communities. We're just saying there's got to be a better understanding of the impact our local decisions make for the statewide economy and environment. And this bill does, I think, hopefully some really good things to encourage that conversation at the local level.
Thanks, Pete. I know we've got just a little bit more time left, so if anyone has another question, you're welcome to pose it in the chat or just unmute yourself.
Yeah, see, Thomas is talking about one of the main reforms that we highlighted. And that's targeted. I mean, that it's even the states that did statewide zoning reforms like Texas and Montana, and Maine's a big one too. It's not like they're zoning for rural districts without water and sewer. There are still most of the ones in New England that we highlighted in Nick's section are still predicated under some, village center, water and sewer, transit, job hub, population threshold. That's really, of course, what we want to be talking about in Connecticut too. Again, sometimes the opponents of these bills will make kind of silly claims about skyscrapers in rural communities or big, developments on dirt roads in rural parts of the state. We just know that's not going to get built out there. We wouldn't think of that as a policy win anyway. And the bill just doesn't do that. But if I think the incentives are aligned correctly, that local communities are educated on what as of right means, what it doesn't mean, what parking reform means and what it doesn't mean, and what is a transit oriented district, all those things I think can hopefully expand the imagination and the action that local communities can take. And we hope change the politics that to say, oh, wow, if we really want to do this for whatever reason, whether, as Phoebe mentioned, it's the economy, it's equity, it's the environment, tax base, whatever it is, if we want to do this at the local level, now under 8002, there are going to be some sizable resources for that community to figure out all these really important questions and collaborate at the local level. So we think that's a really good thing. These are not state mandates. These are not displacing local control. They're not undermining zoning or planning. We think they're enhancing that, but they are certainly asking our local planning and zoning commissions to think a little bit more ambitiously, certainly at the local level, but just to think more broadly of the impact all these decisions make at the state economic level. And we think that's a long overdue in this process, but that'll mean very different outcomes in different parts of the state.
Bangor, Maine, I've just written this up in the chat. They've done something very clever. They had a competitive bid, an RFP, a bunch of architects applied. The winning bid was at think, $190,000. And they've got 6 designs ranging from a 1-bedroom ADU to I think it's a 4-unit apartment building. And it's consistent with the building styles that are popular in Maine. Anyone can go to Town Hall, and I think it's now even their website, and it's pre-approved. There's no need for any further approvals. So it cuts out the architectural fees. It cuts out the timelines. Apparently, this was floated in Connecticut. The architects were up in arms saying, look, this is our bread and butter, and we don't like the idea. But Maine's taken a big step forward, and presumably anyone or any town could do much the same, even if it starts out with one single ADU. Get a contract going, or go to the Yale School of Architecture and say, here's a contest for students and faculty. Best bid is the winning design is free to build for anyone. It could be pre-approved. It could be free for anyone in Connecticut.
Yeah.
We're hearing some local P&Zs in Connecticut and planning departments actually doing similar things, just getting it off the ground at this point in time. Not statewide, but potentially working across multiple towns and cities together, or obviously a statewide would be nice because that's how we scale it the best. But the more you can have things off the shelf, the better.
We're familiar, and there's a couple different states that have done that too, even for modular mobile homes and tiny homes and some other standardization. But it does get back to that point. Thank you, Thomas, for bringing that up. It just, the more you do standardize things, there will be
the cheaper it is to build.
The cheaper it'll be. So the nice thing about this council on housing development that is now stood up is they can consider things like this and say, do we think this is a good idea? Get some feedback from it and make recommendations, either administratively of what can we already do under existing legislation, or make recommendations for future legislation. And those are all, I think, some really good conversations to bring to that body and to follow up on. But it is hard to ask one town and one planning and zoning commission, one planning department, and even one COG to figure this stuff out. I mean, that's kind of the new thing in this bill is we're elevating COGs in a meaningful way to create some of these standards and plans. And if some of them are really embrace this and come up with some of those recommendations, I think that'll help. But you also bring up part of why things are so slow in Connecticut is there are different interests. Here in form-based code. There's 6 communities in Connecticut that have form-based code. That matters a great deal, as Phoebe said too, of kind of the specifics that get into it. Hamden, on one hand, is a very good one, and on the other hand, it hasn't gotten built necessarily. But there are definitely tools folks can make. Obviously you hear a lot of objections about the aesthetics of certain developments, and to the extent that Desegregated Connecticut cares about the aesthetics, we care more about homes getting built and people being in secure housing than what it looks like. But there's certainly towns that do care about that. So there are ways and tools to do that, even within as of right.
And that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing we'd love to. We talk about that in Weston on P&Z about adopting a form-based code, but we have no money for it. We don't. None of us know how to do it. So that would be something that would be great to have sort of state resources for. In that, like, again, going back to like how much better it is to do things at the state level. Like if we had a model form-based code, I mean, it's not like the architectural traditions of Hamden are different than the architectural traditions of Weston.
I agree with you. I think some people might not agree with you, but
I was just going to say Gus just threw down the gauntlet there. So
any final questions before we wrap up? We've got about 5 minutes left.
It's been a great discussion.
Yes, it has. Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. I just want to point out that Matt put a comment in the chat about that COGS will now be in a better position to develop model regulations with some of the additional funding from 8002.
Okay. It's worth looking at. I've got a link there to Brian Potter's article. He's he's a construction industry veteran who's worked at two well-known startups, one of which imploded. But anyway, and he's got very informative data on construction costs nationwide. It's on the Substack, constructionphysics.com. Lots of great data in there.
I do want to shout out here. I think sometimes, advocates aren't coming at this that, advocates know better or can't trust local planners. We do have a great local planning community here. I think sometimes I wish they were more vocal on some of these conversations, but the ones that are in the organization, APA Connecticut, particularly, has been very good on this stuff. There are a lot of really good ideas. I would love to have a grad school program in Connecticut for planners. I think that's something that we're missing. But
School of Architecture.
Yeah, I think as a bias, I'd rather have a bias towards planning than lawsuits. No offense to lawyers on the meeting, but I think we've got plenty of lawyers in Connecticut. I think we have to empower some more planners to do some work on and more proactive on this stuff.
Thank you.
I think with that, any other questions? If not, Sean, Kayla, thank you guys so much for the time. And folks know where to find us if you folks have any questions about anything that we said or want to get more involved.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. Thanks, Sean. This is such a great conference you guys put together. We're always really thrilled to be a part of it. Thank you so much for putting this all together.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being part
Thank
of
you
it.
so much.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. And if you're sticking around for the next set of sessions, they start at 3 p.m. There's a couple great conversations, housing and everything else across sector exploration of differing solutions, an amazing session on the role and importance of CDFIs in Connecticut, and finally a session on pathways to homeownership for tribal communities. So hope to see you folks there.